Okay, welcome everybody back to the Titus Roundtable, where we're encouraging pastors and we're reminding the church of its hope around the world, and that's Christ in you, the hope of glory. We hope this brings joy to the leaders and gives a lot of hope no matter what our setting, and this would be a progress of joy and faith through the encouragement that we give here. We're answering the question, how can we let Jesus build his church and still maintain responsible leadership? So far, we have said that the life of Christ invades the church by grace. And then the life and authority of Jesus is embraced, those grace movements are embraced by faith. In this session, we want to talk about how does the life of Christ continue? And here it is, the life and authority of Christ continues by regular acts of worship. The first one was the stewardship of grace. The second one was the stewardship of faith. And this is a stewardship of worship. And we want to particularly focus on a worship that maintains a first love relationship with Jesus. And so I think I'd like to start with this question. Is life, all of life, for the believer, an expression of worship and first love for Jesus?
It appears to me that everybody worships, but not necessarily Jesus Christ. They worship what they love.
Yeah, well said.
We praise things every day, and praise is a form of worship. And we may praise a ball team, we may praise a lover, we may praise our kids for doing good, but not every praise is a worship. If it's not to God, then it's not true worship.
Right. We are right, though, by saying that ultimately we need to get to the point where we understand that everything we do is meant to be a worship. You know, one of the things that, as I've studied this subject down through the years, I realize that my preaching is probably my top way of worshiping as far as a public. You know, I can sometimes get caught up in the melody of a song or the mood of a song or something, but when I've really prepared before God, I think I can legitimately say that my best form of public worship is when I worship Jesus with my sermons. And then he takes it and breaks it and blesses it and feeds the people with that worship. So is that okay? I mean, are we talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, and it's helpful to know that certainly everything has the capacity to be an expression of worship, but I guess on the other hand, it also has the capacity to be expression of idolatry if we're not. And so being aware of that, and ultimately it's from the heart, I guess.
Yeah. Here's a question. Can a church be doing everything right and still be in trouble because it's left its first love?
Absolutely.
I fell in love with a new word a while back called perfunctory.
Define.
Perfunctory. Okay, and I had to look it up because I read it in a book. And it's basically you're just going through the motions with no heart attachment. And Jesus quoted that from Isaiah 29:13. He says, "For as much as this people draw near to me with their mouth, and with their lips they do honor me, but their heart is far from me. And their worship toward me," I think that one language says their fear toward me, but it can be translated, their worship toward me is taught by the precept of men. So we just go through these motions, and there is no authentic worship. It is just, we're doing what we've been taught is the right thing to do, and where's God in that?
Yeah. Can we, please, I trust all of our viewers and everybody will understand this question with all of its purity. Is it possible to have sound doctrine and leave our first love?
Yeah, and that's what the church at Ephesus was being accused by Jesus himself of doing. They had sound doctrine, they were strong believers, and they were not tolerating idolatry within the church, but he said, I have this against you. You've left your first love. So he's referring to himself. They had ignored. I think in my own heart that they were ignoring the true worship of God, even though they're doing everything right in their activity.
You know, what I saw in that letter is that they were checking the apostles, where they were guilty or not, of false apostles.
Right.
They were making sure they did it as unto the Lord, but somehow their hearts had grown cold. And they worked hard. Mm-hmm. It seems like it was a hard-working church.
Perfunctory, right?
Yeah.
Let's go with that.
And so let's do it. Just take just a minute. I don't want to cut off any comments that you might. Paul, what were you going to say?
Well, I just think of that letter written to the church at Ephesus is only about 30 to 60 years removed from the first epistle.
Wow. Yeah.
And to comprehend and to know the love of God, you have these beautiful sayings. And then you have this 60-year period, and the entire church, it took a generation or two. Just a generation, and the next group had lost it. And I think we become guilt-based worshipers. God, I fear if I don't, what are you going to do to me? Or we become this legalistic, this is what we do because, we've got to do this for God. And I tell you, that's a miserable way to live.
Yeah.
If you teach your kids to live that way and your people to live that way, they're not going to live that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But when they live for the worship of Jesus, it's beautiful, it's full of joy.
Yeah.
It's a different way to live.
You brought up something there, and we could really get off on this, and be a good rabbit trail, but we won't go very far. What we need to be constantly doing is having first-generation Christians born. And now, first-generation Christian is one who has experienced the power and presence of God for himself. And what happens is, let's say Mike, who has done that, then his children ride on his coattails, and they haven't really experienced the power and presence of God in their own lives. So they begin to borrow dad's faith, and then it's handed down to grandpa's faith. And that's what happens. That by that third generation, it's a washout. And there's no more enjoying of God because our in-loveness with Jesus has stopped. And so our worship is stagnant and maybe pragmatic and so forth. So can we just quickly say, what is first love? What is first love really? Is there anybody that's heard preachers preach on this and the general take that's given to it? But what would you say is first love?
I would say it would call for all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind. It's just all of my being wanting to be with Him and His presence.
Yeah. You have that toward your bride Pam, don't
I
you?
do. So it's not a conflict, though. As a matter of fact, it's all in harmony.
Yeah.
I love to be with my bride, but as a matter of fact, we both love to harmonize in the presence of the Lord.
Yeah. So I hope all the couples watching heard that statement, because that's the key to a great marriage. It is.
I think love, as far as first love to Jesus, has to deal with the fact that I want to serve Him because of who He is and not because He asks it of me. So a first love event is when I do something because I just want to please that person. I love them enough that I want to please them.
I want to make this statement because I asked myself, when Jesus said, remember, repent, and return, I want to ask myself, what is first love and what are the first works? I won't do first works here, but just to say this, first love happens, I think, when we find in another that is so desperately, that which is so desperately needed in ourselves. And for me, the most vulnerable day of my life and your life, all of our lives, will be when we stand before God. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. We're going to stand before God. And the only thing I will have to plea is Jesus. That is the most vulnerable day. And if I can live with that day in mind and then look back at a cross where that provision was made for me, that keeps me in love with Jesus. Now, here's a question. How can we nurture our people in first love? Remember, while you're thinking, grace enters, brings the life of Christ. Faith embraces it. Now we want it to continue. How many would say that when we leave our first love, our church is on the downhill slide. And we may look perfectly fine, but somehow we're cold. How, as we as leaders, can we nurture that first love? What would you say?
We were talking earlier just about, Dave and I were talking about an adoration of Christ, to teach not just regular Sundays, but to be in awe of Christ as often as we can teach it.
So intentional adoration. Okay?
I think worship, I know that worship is birthed in God's heart. You know, God worships God. The Son worshipped the Father. And so if worship is birthed in Him, we have to go to Him to even desire to worship Him.
Wow.
So in prayer we ask, help me to love you, help me to want to worship you for who you are. And then God answers that kind of prayer because it always honors Him. And so that prayer that originates in His heart, that He would be glorified, comes through us, and we give it back when we praise Him and thank Him. And so we cycle the glory that God originated in the first place.
Yeah, the glory cycle.
Yeah.
When you taught that here, it just changed my life, really. And when you say only God can worship God, it's like that's big and really, but it's true. There's got to be a sense of God in me that's worshiping God.
Right.
So,
and I think, coming back to, as Paul prayed for the church at Ephesus, know that which passes knowledge, know the love of God. And so for people to be anchored in the love of God, which is incomparable.
Yeah.
The loyal love, the mercy of God. I think in so many cases we've only tiptoed into that.
how about the Lord's Supper? Isn't that a good way to review Paul, did you have a comment?
It says in God's word not to love the world, 1 John. And the way you love Christ and we nurture it in those we shepherd is, I think of Deuteronomy 6, instruction to parents, you love the Lord your God with all your whole soul, mind, why? And these words that I teach you this day shall be in thine heart. I got to model it. It's going to be a big deal to me. I got to live it. And as I live it I think my time is consumed. I give time to God's love, the worship. Everything I do is God. I'm taking everything He's given me. It's all for God all the time. I think we lose a love for the world. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And that is wrought in us as we yield more and more to God. And it's something He does.
There's a gospel transformation, isn't
Yeah.
it? So, thank you, men. So let's, as leaders, continue to lead our people to that first love worship. And maybe, just maybe, we need to stop all the busyness sometimes in our churches and get back to that one thing that we've left.
Amen.
Lord bless you, and thanks for being with us on the Roundtable. And check out our blog and the material that's on our website.